The most beautiful love story you will see today, Elon Musk and Lilian. Dear viewer, before we begin, I invite you to subscribe so these stories can keep finding their way to you. The ocean stretched endlessly, a silk tapestry of blue beneath the grandeur of the Celeste horizon, the luxury cruise liner that shimmered like a floating palace as it departed from the bustling port of New York. On board, the world's attention quietly followed one man, Elon Musk, a name that evoked ambition, extravagance, and headlines that never quite stayed still. Known as much for his engineering marvels as for his romances that flickered like candle flames, he now traveled toward Europe, accompanied by a fresh wave of curiosity. His recent engagement to Vivian Darcy, heiress to an old banking empire, had stirred the tabloids into a frenzy. Photographers had gathered at the dock to capture his confident stride as he boarded. His tailored suit, his aloof charm, the hint of a smirk as he dodged questions, all played into the story the world expected of him. But stories, as life often teaches, have a way of writing themselves beyond the ink we choose. Amidst the polished decks and crystal chandeliers of the ship, Lilian Hartley embarked quietly. Unlike Elon, no reporters shadowed her steps. She was a woman of poised independence, a singer of refined taste, known in intimate circles for her voice that could both pierce and heal. Her gowns were simple, her jewelry modest, yet she carried an elegance that could not be borrowed. It was born of solitude and sincerity. Their first encounter was not grand. It was on the upper deck, where the sea breeze played gently with loose strands of hair, and the scent of salt lingered in the air. Elon, escaping the weight of expectations, wandered alone, savoring a rare moment of anonymity. Lilian stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon, her gloved hands resting lightly on the railing. When their paths crossed, it was purely by accident, a small misstep on Elon's part as the ship swayed slightly. "Careful," Lilian murmured, steadying herself without so much as a flinch. Elon chuckled, brushing off the moment. "Seems the ocean is determined to keep me humble." "Perhaps it knows you're overdue for it," she replied, not looking at him. His interest flickered. Few spoke to him so plainly. "And you are?" "Someone who prefers quiet voyages." "Then you've boarded the wrong ship," he grinned, leaning casually on the railing. "I suspect quiet won't last long here." "It usually doesn't when you're around." Their exchange was laced with playful tension, a verbal dance where each step was carefully measured. Elon, accustomed to admiration, found her resistance almost refreshing. He tried to soften the distance with charm, offering subtle compliments, but Lilian maintained a graceful boundary. "I'm engaged," she mentioned, almost as if dismissing the possibility before it could breathe. "So am I," he countered, surprising even himself with the ease of the confession. "Curious world, isn't it?" She finally looked at him then, her hazel eyes calm, unamused, and quietly amused all at once. Perhaps too curious. In the days that followed, both sought to maintain the comfortable separation that propriety demanded. Elon buried himself in scheduled appearances, tennis matches with wealthy acquaintances, and polite dinners that numbed rather than nourished. Lilian spent her mornings practicing in the ship's modest music hall, her afternoons lost in pages of old poetry, and her evenings dining alone with a kind of deliberate peace. But fate, in its patient weaving, had little regard for their careful distance. At a formal dinner arranged by the ship's captain, their names appeared side by side on delicate place cards. Lilian noticed at first, her lips pressing into a soft line of resignation as Elon approached the table with a quiet grin. "Seems the ship has conspired against you," he teased, pulling out her chair. "Perhaps," she said, sitting without meeting his gaze, "or perhaps it's just seating logistics." The dinner unfolded with surprising ease. They spoke not of money, nor headlines, nor reputations. Instead, their conversation drifted toward books, the intricacies of music, the melancholy of Chopin, and the wild joy hidden in Beethoven's later works. Lilian found herself listening, truly listening, as Elon revealed a depth rarely seen by the world, his passion for the cello, a secret he scarcely shared. "I used to play," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "Not for anyone else, just for myself. There's something about the way a cello mourns and dreams at the same time." Lilian's eyes softened, her curiosity reluctant but sincere. "Do you still play?" "Not in years. Life got too loud." And for a moment, the weight of that silence between them settled like a truth too precious to disturb. As days folded into one another, their paths crossed more often, not by accident, but not by deliberate design either. Morning walks on the deck became a quiet ritual, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. They discussed composers, the delicate art of restraint, and the strange loneliness that fame could never truly touch. One afternoon, as the ship docked briefly at a sun-drenched port, Elon extended an invitation. "There's a small chapel near the square. They say it holds a rare collection of antique instruments. Would you come?" Lilian hesitated, her fingers grazing the edge of her shawl. "Why me?" "Because you wouldn't look at them with your phone. You'd listen." Her refusal lingered on her tongue, but something in his expression, a boyish hopefulness he had long buried, disarmed her. "All right," she said, her voice almost too soft for the wind to catch. "But just this once." That afternoon unfolded like a page neither had expected to read. Surrounded by the quiet hum of the chapel and the aged scent of varnished wood, Elon ran his fingers lightly over the curves of a forgotten cello. Lilian watched, not as a woman wary of scandal, but as someone witnessing the fragile return of something long abandoned. Their connection was still discreet, still wrapped in the caution their circumstances required. And yet, it had rooted itself quietly, like a melody hummed just beneath breath. Neither of them named it, neither of them dared, but the sea, endless and knowing, seemed to carry their secret all the same. The days aboard the Celeste Horizon began to blend into something both comforting and unsettling for Elon Musk. What had started as a distraction, a simple escape from the tireless noise of his public life, was slowly becoming a chapter he did not know how to write. Lilian Hartley continued to cross his path, not as a coincidence, but as a quiet certainty. Morning walks, afternoon teas, unplanned conversations beneath the salted wind, they unfolded as naturally as breathing, and with each passing hour, Elon found himself less inclined to resist. Their connection grew in the quiet spaces, not in grand declarations, but in the simple ways their silences no longer felt empty. Lilian, too, found herself treading unfamiliar waters. She had boarded the ship believing she understood herself, her heart, her promises, but Elon's presence unsettled her in ways she dared not name aloud. When the ship docked in Cannes, the radiant coastline welcomed them with its lazy charm, sunlit cafes, and streets that seemed to remember stories long after their tellers had gone. Elon surprised Lilian with an invitation, a visit to his grandfather, Jacques Musk, a man he rarely introduced to anyone outside his family. "I would like you to meet him," Elon said, his voice unusually careful. He's someone who knows the parts of me most people don't bother to see." Lilian hesitated. This was not a casual step, but something in his tone, a quiet longing, softened her resolve. "I'd be honored." Jacques lived in a modest stone house nestled among lavender fields, far removed from the gleam of Elon's usual world. His hands, worn from years of craftsmanship, trembled slightly as he greeted them at the gate, but his embrace was steady and full of warmth. "Ah, this must be Lilian," Jacques said, his accent softened by age. His sharp, knowing eyes lingered on the way Elon glanced at her when he thought no one was looking. "I see you've brought me someone special." Elon's usual composure faltered. "She's a friend." Jacques smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to men who have outlived the need for pretense. He welcomed Lilian as if she were family, sharing stories of Elon's childhood, tales woven with laughter, and a delicate thread of regret for time's swift passing. It was in Jacques' home, among the scent of aged wood and sun-dried linens, that Lilian saw a side of Elon the world had been too impatient to notice, a grandson, a listener, a man who knew how to slow down. He lingered over the faded photographs on Jacques' mantel, his fingers brushing them with a tenderness he rarely allowed himself. Later, sitting beneath the shade of an old olive tree, Elon confessed what had long remained buried beneath ambition. "I used to dream of another life," he said softly, staring at the calloused lines of his own hands. "A life where I could simply play the cello, travel quietly, maybe teach. I thought maybe I could be happy with that." Lilian, touched by his candor, offered a silence that was not empty but open. "What stopped you?" she asked. His eyes flicked toward the distant sea. "The world demanded something else from me, and maybe I was afraid to disappoint it." "You still play," she pressed gently. "Not the way I should. Not the way I would if I were brave." Her heart tightened at the quiet ache in his voice. She reached out, her hand resting briefly over his. "Perhaps it's not too late." Their days in can became a string of intimate moments, visits to quiet bookshops, meals shared in modest cafes, conversations about what happiness might look like beyond expectation. Yet the undercurrent of guilt, persistent and cold, trailed them like a shadow. They spoke of their respective engagements in vague, distant terms, each unwilling to pierce the fragile bubble they had built. Elon avoided the eager photographers who prowled the docks, sidestepping interviews and obligations that once defined him. "This is just a friendship," Lilian would remind herself late at night, staring at the ceiling of her cabin as the ship gently swayed. A special friendship, nothing more. But the lie dissolved slowly with each lingering glance, each moment when Elon's touch brushed hers longer than necessary. On a warm evening, as the ship hosted a formal dance under a sky heavy with stars, Lilian descended the grand staircase wearing a gown of soft midnight blue. Elon's breath caught, a subtle tremor betraying his practiced calm. He offered his hand, and she accepted without words. They danced not as two people fulfilling social expectation, but as if the rest of a room had quietly folded away. The distance they had so carefully maintained unraveled with every step, every stolen glance. When the music softened, Elon's voice reached her ear in a low whisper. "I think I've known from the very first day on the deck, but I tried to ignore it." Lilian's reply trembled between surrender and restraint. "We are promised to others." "I know. We can't, we shouldn't." His thumb gently brushed against the back of her hand, a simple gesture that made the room feel unbearably small. "And yet here we are," he said quietly, not as a challenge, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the undeniable. They did not speak of love, not yet, but it hung between them like a cord left unresolved, aching to be finished. Later, as they stood beneath the open sky, Lilian whispered the words they both dreaded. "When this voyage ends, so must this, whatever this is." Elon's jaw tensed, but he nodded. "Unless we find a way to make it right. I won't ask you to abandon your life. I won't betray mine. But I can't pretend this is nothing." "Nor can I," she admitted, her voice fragile. Their decision was made without fanfare. They would let the sea carry their hearts for now, knowing that soon they would be forced to choose between the lives they had built and the one they had found, unexpectedly, within each other. The ship sailed on, oblivious to the quiet ache blossoming on its deck. The days aboard the Celeste Horizon had become numbered. The ship that once seemed suspended in timeless waters now inched steadily toward its final port, as if the world, with all its obligations and expectations, was waiting just beyond the dock. For Elon Musk and Lilian Hartley, the weight of their separate lives pressed heavily upon them. Like a tide, they could no longer hold back. Their growing affection, nurtured in sunlit strolls and whispered conversations, now trembled under the weight of reality. Both were still bound to others, promises made, futures designed by arrangement rather than desire. The walls they had momentarily escaped were slowly rising again. One evening, as the ship neared its journey's end, Elon and Lilian stood together on the observation deck. The ocean stretched before them, endless but no longer theirs to claim. The wind toyed with Lilian's auburn waves, and Elon's gaze lingered on her profile, memorizing the quiet curve of her jaw, the the thoughtful stillness in her green-flecked eyes. "This can't be the end," Elon said at last, his voice low but firm, as though he were speaking not just to her but to the fates themselves. "Not like this. Not with the world waiting to pull us apart." Lilian's reply caught in her throat. She wanted to tell him that their timing was impossible, that they had met in borrowed hours. But her heart betrayed her caution. "What would you have us do?" Elon turned to face her fully, his expression unguarded. "Let's give life a chance to test us. If what we feel is true, if it's more than the sweetness of a passing moment, then we'll find our way back to each other." He paused, then added with quiet conviction, 6 months from today. Noon, the top of the Eiffel Tower. Lilian's breath caught. The Eiffel Tower, emblem of grandeur, of beginnings, of fragile hopes reaching for the sky. "Elon," her voice faltered. 6 months is a long time. "Long enough to set things right," he said. "Long enough to know if this is real. And if one of us doesn't come." His eyes softened, though his jaw remained firm. "Then we'll know. No explanations. No letters. We either find each other there or we let go." It was reckless. It was impossibly romantic. It was utterly unlike the man the world thought they knew. But Lilian felt the truth settle deep within her chest. "I'll be there," she whispered. Their pact was sealed not with a kiss, but with a long, lingering gaze, a silence charged with all the words they dared not speak. When the ship finally docked, the port bustled with life. Reporters waited, cameras poised, but Elon carefully avoided them, slipping away unnoticed, his farewell to Lilian cloaked in discretion. Their embrace was brief but achingly tender, a collision of hope and melancholy. "I wish I could walk with you just a little longer," Lilian confessed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "You will," Elon promised, holding her hand tightly one last time. 6 months. And then they parted. Elon returned to Paris, a city that had once been just another dot on his itinerary, now transformed into the waiting ground for a future he was no longer sure he could control. He distanced himself from the loud arenas of business, stepping into the quiet, vulnerable world of music. For the first time in years, he let himself really play, taking up his cello with trembling fingers that slowly grew steady again. He performed in small concert halls, pouring his restless heart into every note. His engagement to Vivian Darcy unraveled with quiet finality. No scandal, no shouting, just a mutual understanding that what had drawn them together was no longer enough to hold them. Meanwhile, Lilian moved through her own season of unraveling. She ended her engagement with grace, offering no bitterness, only the quiet explanation that she needed to follow her own path. She returned to the world of music, her voice finding new depth as she sang in intimate venues where strangers wept without knowing why. 6 months crept forward like a slow, deliberate tide. Each day, both of them worked to rebuild their lives, not for each other, but for the selves they had rediscovered. Still, doubt often whispered in the lonely corners of their hearts. Would he come? Would she come? Elon purchased a small, delicate gift, a silver locket, its surface etched with a slender olive branch, a symbol of peace and new beginnings. Inside, he tucked a folded note with only 3 words, "You found me." For Lilian, the approaching day became a precious, secret hope. She told no one. She guarded it as one guards a flame against the wind. When the long-awaited morning arrived, Elon stood atop the Eiffel Tower, the city sprawling beneath him, its heartbeat steady, its sky draped in soft gray light. He watched each face that emerged from the elevator, his pulse quickening with every passing minute. The hour neared noon. He remained still, his faith tethered to the memory of her laughter, to the weight of her final gaze. And then, somewhere in the winding streets below, Lilian ran, her steps echoing against cobblestones, her breath catching in the cool Parisian air. She had nearly missed her train. Crowds slowed her pace. A wrong turn stole precious minutes. But her heart drove her forward with fierce determination. Please let him still be there. Up the elevator she rushed, her gloved hand clutching the rail, as if sheer, could pull her faster to him. On the observation deck, Elon felt the tremor of possibility, a breath caught between hope and surrender. And then he saw her, Lilian, out of breath, hair tousled by the wind, eyes searching until they locked onto his. Neither spoke at first. The world blurred around them. "You're late," Elon whispered, his voice trembling despite his grin. "I'm here," she answered breathless, her eyes shining. And it was enough. The morning that should have marked the fulfillment of a precious promise unfolded with a cruel twist. Lilian Hartley, heart pounding with anticipation, had risen early, wrapping herself in a soft ivory coat, her honeyed auburn hair gathered in a simple twist. She had traced the directions carefully, rehearsed each turn, each step, certain she would find Elon Musk waiting atop the Eiffel Tower as they had vowed. She was running late. The Parisian streets buzzed with the usual rhythm of hurried footsteps and distant horns. Clutching the edge of her coat against the morning chill, Lilian dashed across the final boulevard, her eyes fixed on the looming figure of the tower in the distance, a beacon of hope and reunion. But fate has a way of arriving uninvited. A car gliding too fast, unnoticed in the haze of her determination, struck her before she could see it coming. The collision hurled her to the pavement, her body folding beneath the weight of the moment, the metallic thud swallowed by the gasps of onlookers. Time splintered into fragments, the shout of a stranger, the screech of brakes, the distant echo of her own heartbeat slowing beneath the weight of pain. She was conscious when they lifted her onto the stretcher. Conscious enough to feel the cold seep through her skin, to register the searing ache in her legs, and to realize, before anyone else did, that she would not make it to the tower. Not today. Perhaps not ever. Meanwhile, high above the city, Elon waited. Each minute stretched unbearably, laced with the kind of hope that eventually begins to tremble beneath its own weight. The hours passed as the breeze toyed with his coat and the silver locket he had brought, small, delicate, inscribed with the words, "You found me." But she did not come. First, he told himself she was delayed. Then, perhaps she had changed her mind. Finally, as the sky softened into afternoon light, the sharp edges of reality cut through his resolve. A quiet dread settled into his bones. Elon lingered longer than he should have, his fingers tightening around the locket until it pressed painfully into his palm. When he finally descended, his steps were slow, as though some invisible weight pulled against him. He did not know, could not know, that Lilian lay in a hospital bed not far away, her body broken, her heart aching not just from the impact, but from the knowledge that she had failed to reach him. She survived. But in the days that followed, the severity of her injuries became clear. Her mobility would be forever altered. Walking would return, perhaps, but only in part, with the help of a cane, perhaps with visible effort. Dancing, running, the effortless movements she once knew, those had been taken. Lilian sat in her hospital room, her legs wrapped in cold white bandages, and wept not just for the pain, but for the life she believed she no longer belonged to. She pictured Elon waiting, pictured the way his eyes might have scanned the crowd searching for her, and felt the cruel twist of shame knotting inside her. He deserves someone whole, someone who can walk beside him, not someone he must carry. The thought hardened into a quiet decision. When she was discharged, she made no attempt to contact him. No letter, no call. She convinced herself that disappearing was the kindest thing she could offer. She found a modest apartment on the quieter side of Paris, far from the glittering cafes and theaters where his name sometimes appeared in passing conversation. She took a job as a music teacher, her once grand performances reduced to small classrooms where her students marveled at her skill. Unaware of the quiet pain, she hid behind each careful step. Her cane, though slender, felt heavy in her hand. And yet, she rebuilt her life with the delicate precision of someone stitching lace, slow, fragile, but purposeful. Across the city, Elon wrestled with absence. He searched for answers he could not find, for explanations that would not come. Had she fallen out of love? Had their brief time together been less real to her than it had been to him? The ache refused to fade. He poured his longing into his cello, his music deepening with a melancholy that drew audiences closer. His name, once synonymous with industries and inventions, now echoed in the world of music, where the weight of his bow seemed to carry the grief he could not voice. At each performance, his eyes scanned the crowd, as if she might one day appear among the sea of faces, as if she had simply been late all along. But she never came. The silver locket remained with him, unopened, its purpose now suspended in a question that had no answer. Lilian, too, clung to the memory of him. Sometimes after her students had gone, she would sit alone at the piano, her fingers tracing slow, wistful melodies that belonged to no composer, just to her and the hollow space where he should have been. She told herself she had done the right thing. She told herself that sparing him the burden of her new reality was an act of love. And yet, when the wind caught the faint sound of a cello drifting from an open window, her breath would catch, her pulse would quicken, and the ache of absence would return, sharp, familiar, and unforgiving. Time passed. Seasons turned, but the space between them remained alive, a quiet, tender wound that neither could heal, yet neither could forget. In the months that followed, Elon Musk walked through life as though wandering in a city whose streets had suddenly lost their names. He attempted to rebuild his routine, concerts, rehearsals, fleeting interviews, but each step was shadowed by an ache he could neither suppress nor explain away. No matter where he turned, the unanswered question lingered. Why didn't she come? The promise they had made, so vivid, so alive, now felt like a dream slipping between his fingers. He searched for her, quietly, persistently, desperately. He retraced their old paths, reaching out to contacts in the music circles of Paris and Cannes. But Lilian Hartley had vanished. No address, no letters, no whispers. As though the city had swallowed her whole. Elon returned to the Eiffel Tower on 3 separate occasions, each time hoping that by some improbable twist of fate, he would find her standing there waiting. The first time he arrived at noon, his heart pounding against his ribs, breath held against the breeze. The second time, he stayed longer, his gaze scanning every elevator, every step, as if she might simply appear from the folds of time. The third time, he lingered until the sky surrendered to dusk, a faint drizzle settling over the city like a soft farewell. But she never came. He would stand at the railing, the silver locket still cold in his hand, as if the weight of it might anchor him to the memory of what could have been. And Lilian? She walked through her own silent streets. Her days had settled into a delicate rhythm. Each morning, she gathered her music sheets and set out for the small conservatory where she taught vocal lessons to children, her cane clicking softly against the pavement, each step measured, deliberate. The accident had left her with a subtle limp and a persistent ache, but she wore her new reality with quiet grace. She taught with patience, her voice steady, her posture dignified. To her students, she was a gentle, brilliant instructor. To herself, she was a woman learning to live with absence. Friends noticed the shift in her, offering their help, urging her to open up, to lean on someone. But Lilian, ever protective, smiled politely and declined. She avoided all questions about her past, her former performances, her time abroad. Even those closest to her were gently but firmly turned away from the parts of her life that had once belonged to Elon. Some stories are safer when kept in silence. Elon, despite invitations and advances from women drawn to his brilliance, found himself emotionally unavailable. He tried once, twice, to entertain the idea of new beginnings, but each attempt crumbled beneath the silent comparison to Lilian, whose memory remained vivid, untamed, and unreachable. He could not touch her hand, but he could summon her in music. And so he composed. Piece after piece, he poured his longing into haunting melodies, lyrical, aching, infused with quiet devotion. Critics praised his compositions, noting the sorrowful beauty that clung to each note, the sense of unfinished yearning woven through his performances. Audiences wept without knowing why. What Elon did not realize was that he was immortalizing her. His cello sang of her laugh, her quiet strength, the promise they never fulfilled. And somewhere across the city, Lilian would hear faint traces of his music floating from open windows or tucked in the corners of a small radio shop. She never let herself listen fully, never let herself linger, but in the brief moments before she turned away, she recognized the sound of a heart still reaching for her. Perhaps that was enough. To rebuild herself, Lilian began leading small groups of children through art galleries and quiet music halls. She found solace in guiding their wide-eyed wonder, in sharing with them the gentle power of a well-placed note or the simple beauty of a brushstroke. She showed them that joy could be found in the quiet details, a trembling violin string, the soft echo of footsteps on marble floors, the hush that falls before the first note. Though she moved carefully, though she occasionally winced with pain, Lilian never allowed her condition to become a shadow over her students. She chose to build a world where limitation was not absence, but simply another texture in life's tapestry. Unbeknownst to both, they lived strikingly close to each other in Paris, their paths weaving within the same streets, their hearts tethered by the same ache. In time, Elon began to hear quiet mention of a remarkable singing teacher at a modest conservatory, a woman with rare talent and extraordinary grace. Her name was never quite spoken near him, always caught in passing, tucked behind other conversations. He never pursued the thread, believing Lilian to be forever out of reach. Lilian, in her own careful way, occasionally overheard whispers of Elon's growing acclaim, not for his companies, but for his music. She would catch fragments of his story while waiting at cafes, or see posters of his upcoming performances. She allowed herself a private moment of bittersweet pride before turning away. He had found his place. He was thriving. And yet, neither of them found the courage to fully move on. Elon could not open his heart to anyone else, always comparing, always retreating. Lilian politely declined invitations for companionship, convinced that to reach out would only expose Elon to the life she had chosen to shield him from. Both remained suspended in separate lives, unable to fully let go, unwilling to fully move forward. A quiet, invisible thread bound them still, one that neither time nor distance could sever. And in the silent spaces between their days, they each carried the same quiet ache. What if? The air in Paris shimmered with winter's quiet charm, its streets draped in soft garlands of light, the scent of roasted chestnuts curling through the avenues. It was the season when strangers lingered a little longer by shop windows, when even the loneliest hearts yearned for warmth. For Elon Musk, the holidays had become a time of delicate ache, a season that reminded him of promises unkept, of a figure he could no longer find amidst the crowded city. On an ordinary afternoon, as snow threatened to fall but hadn't yet gathered the courage, Elon ducked into a small, independent bookstore, the kind with creaking wooden floors and uneven stacks of poetry volumes. He wasn't searching for anything particular, perhaps just a moment of stillness, a reprieve from the echo of his own music. And there, seated by the window in a quiet corner, was Lilian Hartley. She sat with a book resting delicately in her lap, a soft wool shawl draped around her shoulders, her honeyed auburn hair falling in loose waves. At first, he thought the trick of memory had conjured her. Surely this could not be Lilian, after all this time, after all that absence. But it was her. For a heartbeat, he stood motionless, the past rushing through him like a forgotten melody. And when he finally approached, when his voice hesitantly broke the fragile air between them, she looked up, and their eyes met. Lilian. Her name tumbled from his lips, not as a question, but as a quiet, disbelieving recognition. Lilian's pulse jolted painfully. She had not prepared for this. Not here, not now. She had carefully constructed her life to avoid this moment. She had promised herself she would never allow him to see her as she was now. But here he was, his familiar eyes, the same gentle intensity she had once memorized. Elon, she breathed, forcing a small, composed smile. She remained seated, her cane carefully hidden behind the edge of the table, her posture stiff but graceful, as though she were simply resting rather than tethered by necessity. For a few seconds, the world seemed to slow, the gentle murmur of other shoppers fading into a soft hush. Elon pulled up a chair without asking, his voice carrying a tremble of hope. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought." He paused, watching her carefully. "You didn't come." Her throat tightened, but she masked it with a polite nod. Life has its way of turning us in unexpected directions. There was so much to say, yet the space between them was filled with silences too heavy to bridge. They exchanged careful, almost formal words, as if they were strangers newly acquainted rather than two people who once promised to meet beneath the sky. Elon sensed the distance in her, the soft withdrawal, the way her gaze sometimes flickered toward the door as if contemplating escape. And yet, even in her composure, he noticed something had changed, something quieter, more guarded. "Are you well?" he asked, his voice tender, almost pleading. "I am," she answered softly, her hands folding over her book as though it were a shield. But her posture never shifted, her legs remaining carefully tucked beneath the table, her cane out of sight. In truth, her heart was unraveling inside her chest. She longed to reach for him, to tell him what had truly happened, to confess that the cruel hand of fate, not indifference, had kept her from a tower. But the shame held her still. She could not bear the thought of him seeing her as less than the woman he had known, the woman who walked freely, who danced without hesitation. She believed he deserved someone whole, someone who could walk alongside him without burden. So she asked instead, "Did you find happiness?" Elon's answer came wrapped in a bittersweet smile. "I found music. I found work that fills the days. But happiness," he trailed off, his gaze dropping to his hands. "It's more elusive than I thought." Her eyes shimmered, though she willed back the tears. "You've become something extraordinary. So have you, I imagine." Their words were gentle, but their glances betrayed them. Glances that lingered, that whispered of a love still breathing beneath the surface. Elon, unable to resist, leaned forward slightly. "Can we meet again? There's so much I'd like to understand. So much I still don't know." Lilian's heart fractured beneath the weight of the offer. She shook her head with a carefully constructed smile, her voice steady but soft. "I don't think that would be wise. Some stories are best left as they are." Before he could protest, she gathered her things slowly, deliberately, never rising while he watched. She offered a polite farewell, her voice caught between formality and longing. "Take care, Elon." And with that, she signaled discreetly to a young shop assistant who helped her quietly to the back exit once Elon had turned away. Elon stepped into the cold street, his chest tight with questions he could not answer. The encounter had left him adrift, aching, sensing that something remained unsaid. He later recounted the moment to a trusted friend, unable to shake the feeling that Lilian had been both present and heartbreakingly distant. "She was there, but she wasn't herself," he murmured. "It was like speaking to a ghost." Meanwhile, Lilian wept quietly in her apartment that night, her cane resting nearby like an unwanted companion. She cursed herself for not telling him the truth, for protecting him from a sorrow he might have willingly shared. But still, she believed her silence was an act of love. Both returned to their separate lives, the weight of unspoken words pressing upon them like a soft but relentless ache. Elon, now haunted anew, began revisiting the memories of their voyage, replaying each conversation, each fleeting touch, as if searching for clues he might have missed. Lilian, with trembling resolve, chose to move forward. She would carry the burden of her secret, she decided, even if it meant burying the love she still held quietly, stubbornly, within her heart. The grand concert hall, adorned with chandeliers that glittered like a sky of frozen stars, echoed with the delicate hum of anticipation. Elon Musk sat beneath the soft spotlight, his cello resting against him as if it had become an extension of his very being. The world had come to know him not just as an innovator, but as a musician of rare and aching depth. His compositions, steeped in melancholy, drew listeners into stories they could feel but never fully understand. Tonight, as his bow brushed the strings, the hall held its breath. The final piece, a work he had long hesitated to perform publicly, was one he had written for her. For Lilian. It was tender, quiet, and unbearably human, filled with notes that carried the weight of longing and the fragile pulse of memories that refused to fade. When the final chord trembled into silence, the audience rose in a slow, reverent ovation. Yet Elon remained seated, his gaze lowered, the ache within him as sharp as the day she didn't come. After the concert, as he signed programs and listened absently to well-wishers, an elderly woman approached his table. She was gentle, kind-eyed, and carried herself with the grace of someone who had known both great love and great loss. "I would like to purchase this one," she said, carefully selecting the sheet music for the piece inspired by Lilian. Elon's hands hesitated over the page. "This one is difficult to part with," he admitted softly. The woman studied him, her expression knowing. "Sometimes we must let our music go, even if our hearts do not." He signed it reluctantly and handed it to her as though releasing a piece of his own soul. In the days that followed, Elon continued to visit the quiet cafes and bookshops where his memories of Lilian lingered like the faint scent of forgotten perfume. He would sit in the same worn leather chairs, walk along the same narrow streets, as if retracing those moments might summon her back. One afternoon, over coffee with his friend Jacques, Elon finally admitted what he had long kept close. "She was the great love of my life," he confessed, his voice distant, his hands wrapped tightly around his cup. "I've met many since, but none have held me the way she did. None stayed." Jacques, who had watched his grandson drift through the years like a man chasing shadows, placed a steady hand on Elon's arm. "Perhaps you are not meant to let her go." Meanwhile, Lilian Hartley poured herself into her work. She filled her days with children's laughter, guiding young voices to bloom, showing them the delicate power of music. She brought them to galleries and concerts, teaching them to notice the quiet details, the tremble of a note, the hush of reverence before a melody begins. It was how she kept the ache at bay. It was how she survived the weight of what she had left unsaid. But the memory of Elon, the way his hands moved across the cello, the way his gaze softened when he spoke of dreams, remained stitched into the fabric of her life. The recent encounter had unsettled her more than she dared admit. She could not forget the confusion in his eyes, nor the unspoken plea in his voice when he asked to see her again. One evening, she stood before the window in her modest apartment, listening to the distant hum of the city, and wondered if silence had been the right choice. In the quiet, she remembered something her friend Marianne had once told her: real love is not always about protecting someone from pain. Sometimes it's about letting them see you, flaws, wounds, and all. When Marianne visited again, pressing gently that Lilian should tell Elon the truth, Lilian only shook her head, her mossy green eyes shimmering. "Love is not possession," she said softly. "Sometimes loving someone means stepping aside. He deserves someone who can walk beside him freely without burden. But maybe he would choose the burden if it meant walking with you." Lilian pressed her lips into a thin, trembling line, unwilling to answer. Across the city, Elon's search grew, quietly desperate. The brief encounter in the bookstore had rekindled a hunger for understanding. He returned to the Eiffel Tower one last time, standing beneath its iron arms as the winter wind coiled around him. He told himself that perhaps, just perhaps, he had missed something. That maybe, if he waited long enough, she would appear. But she did not come. He turned to old acquaintances, asking carefully, but Lilian had guarded her life with precision. Her name surfaced in whispers, but her presence remained elusive. Then, unexpectedly, a thread appeared. One of Lilian's young students, a bright-eyed girl named Claire, told her during a quiet lesson, "I saw a man play the cello yesterday. He was very sad. His music made me want to cry, but I didn't know why." Lilian's hands faltered on the piano keys. "What was his name?" she asked, her breath caught in her throat. "His name was Elon. The other adults called him the sad cellist." The word struck Lilian with a force she could not contain. The knowledge that Elon still carried the same sorrow, that his music had not healed but preserved the ache, it shattered the fragile distance she had worked so hard to maintain. Alone in her apartment that evening, she traced the rim of a chipped teacup, her tears falling soundlessly. She had told herself he would forget, that he would build a life untouched by her absence. But he hadn't, and neither had she. Fate, however, seemed unwilling to let their story dissolve completely. By chance, Elon stumbled upon her location, an address mentioned in passing by an acquaintance who knew of a remarkable music teacher. He stood outside the quiet building for a long time, uncertain whether he should knock, uncertain whether reopening the door would heal them or wound them further. Inside, Lilian sat by the window, her cane resting quietly nearby, unaware that Elon was only steps away. The distance between them had narrowed, yet the silence still held power. A final meeting loomed like a held breath, inevitable but cloaked in uncertainty. Would the truth find its voice? Or would it remain buried beneath their stubborn love and unspoken sacrifices? The city waited. So did they. The streets of Paris felt heavier that morning, as though they, too, carried the weight of stories left unfinished. Elon Musk walked slowly, his steps deliberate, guided by a quiet, insistent pull he could not explain away. For weeks he had hesitated, circling the idea, like a man afraid to look directly at the sun. But now, the time for wondering had passed. His heart, no longer willing to accept the silences, brought him to the front door of a modest building tucked away on a quiet street, a place far removed from the glittering spaces he was used to. It was not where he had imagined Lilian Hartley would build her life, but somehow it suited her, simple, dignified, quietly apart from the world's noise. He climbed the narrow staircase, his hand trailing the worn wooden banister, unsure of what he would find at the top. 1,000 possibilities flickered in his mind, each one dissolving beneath the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. When he reached her door, he paused, listening to the faint sounds inside. Then, summoning a courage he barely recognized, he knocked. On the other side, Lilian's heart stopped. Her fingers tightened around the book in her lap. She had not expected him, not today, not ever. She had carefully arranged her life in this quiet space where he would never cross the threshold. She glanced instinctively at her wheelchair nearby, her pulse surging with panic. Quickly, she shifted to the armchair closest to the door, pulling a soft shawl over her shoulders, adjusting her posture to sit as if she had merely been resting. She positioned her cane just out of sight, her breathing shallow but composed. When she opened the door, her mossy green eyes met his. "Elon," she said softly, her voice steady, betraying none of the tremor beneath. I hope this isn't a bad time," he said, his expression somewhere between hesitant and hopeful. He paused, carefully choosing his words. "I just felt I needed to see you." Lilian smiled gently, masking the storm inside her. "Of course. Please come in." The apartment was warm and simple, filled with books, modest paintings, and soft winter light filtering through linen curtains. Elon took a step inside, his gaze scanning the room as though absorbing every quiet detail. "I brought something for you," he said, producing a small, carefully wrapped box from his coat pocket. "I bought this years ago, actually. I was going to give it to you the day we were supposed to meet." Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it, unwrapping it slowly to reveal a delicate silver locket etched with the slender design of an olive branch. Inside, folded carefully, was a note with 3 words, "You found me." Her breath caught, and her fingers lingered over the words far longer than she meant to. "It was always yours," he whispered. Lilian blinked back tears, quickly composing herself. "Thank you. It's beautiful." They sat, a careful distance between them, exchanging words that skimmed safely along the surface. Small things, the weather, familiar music halls, old friends in passing. But Elon, with the quiet precision he had honed over years of watching people, sensed the guardedness in her. His eyes drifted across the room, pausing when he noticed a peculiar emptiness on one of the shelves. His brow furrowed. "You know," he said, his voice softening, "there's something I've been missing for quite some time. I once sold the original sheet music for a very personal composition, the one I wrote for you. I never saw it again after that night." Lilian's posture stiffened, her hands curling tightly around the fabric of her shawl. "That's a beautiful piece," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Elon tilted his head slightly, watching the delicate way her gaze dropped to her lap, the faint shift in her breathing. He followed the thread of his intuition until his eyes landed on a corner of the apartment, something discreetly covered with a soft linen cloth, as if tucked away without thought. Without a word, he rose, his movements slow, respectful. "May I?" he asked. Lilian's heart thudded in her chest, but she simply nodded, unable to summon the strength to refuse. Elon gently lifted the cloth, revealing a simple wooden frame. His breath caught when he saw what lay beneath the glass, the original partitura, the sheet music he thought lost, lovingly preserved and discreetly displayed. A quiet tremor passed through him. The answer, so elusive for so long, now stood before him in the simplest of truths. "She was there," he whispered to himself. "You were there." The room fell into a profound silence. His eyes found hers, searching, soft, but firm in their understanding. "You were at the tower, weren't you?" he asked, his voice low, not an accusation, but an aching realization. Lilian's defenses crumbled. She lowered her gaze, her composure slipping through her trembling hands. "I tried," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I was on my way, Elon. I was running late. I was hit by a car." The words came in fragments, fragile and raw. "I thought I could protect you," she continued, tears rising. "I thought you deserved someone who could walk freely beside you. Someone whole. I didn't want you to carry my burden." Elon crossed the room slowly and knelt before her, his hands gently reaching for hers. "I would have carried it gladly," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never needed you to be anything but yourself." The truth, finally spoken, wrapped itself around them like a bomb, painful, beautiful, and freeing. Lilian's tears slipped down her porcelain cheeks, her high cheekbones flushed with the release of years of quiet sorrow. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she whispered. Elon's fingers tightened gently around hers. "The right thing would have been to let me love you completely, just as you are." In that moment, the years, the silence, the unanswered questions, all of it dissolved. Their love, though battered and scarred, had survived the distance, the pride, the unspeakable pain. It had waited, and now it had found its way home. The silence that settled between Elon Musk and Lilian Hartley after her confession was not cold. It was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something vast, something tender and unfinished finally finding space to breathe. They sat together, their hands still gently intertwined, the quiet humming around them like a fragile thread reconnecting what had been severed by years of silence. Neither rushed to speak. Words, after all, had failed them once. Now they took their time. Elon finally broke the stillness, his voice a soft echo. "I always felt there was something you never told me. I couldn't name it, but I carried it with me. In every note I played, in every room I left too quickly, I was chasing the shape of what I didn't understand." Lilian lowered her gaze, her thumb brushing lightly over the back of his hand. "I was afraid. Not of you, never of you. I was afraid of what you would feel if you saw me this way. I wanted to protect you. I thought maybe if you believed I had simply chosen another life, you'd let go more easily." Elon's lips curved into a tender, bittersweet smile. That was never possible. Her eyes shimmered, the weight of years pressing against her chest. "I thought you deserved someone who could move with you, someone who wouldn't slow you down." His hand tightened around hers, gently but firmly. "I never needed you to be perfect. I only ever needed you to be there." She blinked quickly, fighting the tears, but they came anyway, soft and unrestrained. They sat together for what felt like hours, sharing quiet memories from their voyage on the celeste horizon. The first time they crossed paths on the deck, the playful exchanges, the hurried strolls at sunrise, the delicate, dangerous pull that neither of them dared to name at the time. They laughed gently, their shoulders brushing, their hearts learning to find rhythm again. Elon's voice softened. "We lost so much time. But what if we stop running? What if we start now just as we are?" Lilian's breath caught, hesitation rising instinctively. "Elon, I can't give you the life I imagined for you. I can't climb mountains or chase every city across the map. You don't have to, he said, his gaze steady, his thumb tracing soft circles over her knuckles. We can build something new. Smaller, quieter maybe, but ours. His certainty, his quiet resolve, unraveled the last fragile walls she had clung to. For the first time in years, Lilian allowed herself to truly envision a life where love did not mean sacrifice, where being loved did not require her to vanish. Elon began visiting her apartment often, not as a guest, but as someone gradually becoming part of her world. He helped with small things, reaching the high shelves, carrying groceries, walking with her to the corner cafe where she had always admired the music playing softly in the mornings. They fell into a rhythm, not hurried but tender. They listened to music together, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes discussing the stories woven into each note. Elon would bring his cello to her apartment, filling the space with melodies that spoke more than words ever could. One quiet evening, as the golden light of sunset streamed across the floorboards, Lilian leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, I want to dream again. I think I'd like to imagine tomorrow with you. Elon's smile was soft, a rare, unguarded thing. That's all I've wanted. The people around them noticed the change. Jacques, who had long watched his grandson drift through life as a man haunted, now saw him walking lighter, his expression no longer weighed by unspoken regrets. Marianne, Lilian's dearest friend, observed the new light in Lilian's eyes, the way her laughter came more easily, the way she allowed herself to speak of the future. The shadows that had long clung to them began to lift. Lilian slowly returned to teaching music to children in small public performances, letting her voice echo in intimate halls where curious, wide-eyed children sat cross-legged, enchanted by her gentle melodies. She no longer hid her cane. She no longer shied away from the edge of the stage. Elon stood in the back of those halls, watching her with quiet pride, his heart swelling as she reclaimed the spaces she had once abandoned. Do you trust me? He asked her one afternoon, as they sat beneath the soft canopy of a park tree. She looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I do. I'd like us to travel. Nothing far, nothing rushed, just small places, new cafes, seaside towns. I want you to remember what it feels like to see the world again. Fear flickered briefly in her eyes, but his patience disarmed her. I want that too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And so they began planning quiet trips, weaving new memories into the corners of Paris and slowly beyond. They walked carefully, sometimes slowly, but always together. Their love no longer burned with the feverish desperation of youth. It had softened into something more enduring, more honest. It had been tested by time, by pride, by silence. It had survived. Now, it found its own gentle rhythm. There was no need for grand declarations, no urgency to race against the clock. What they shared now was steady, grounded, a quiet miracle in the middle of ordinary days. Elon continued to perform, his music now filled with new warmth, still tender, but no longer aching. Lilian continued to teach, her songs becoming stories of resilience and quiet hope. And those who knew them, who loved them, marveled at the way they had come back to each other, not as they once were, but as they were meant to be. The morning air in Paris carried a quiet crispness as Elon Musk made his way to the familiar house nestled beyond the lavender hedges. His grandfather, Jacques, had always been the steady compass in his life, the one who had gently guided him when the world felt too vast, too fast, too loud. Today, Elon came not for direction, but to share a long-awaited truth. Jacques greeted him with warm eyes and a firm, familiar embrace. It's been a while, mon garçon. You carry yourself lighter today. Elon smiled, the kind that comes from carrying a secret too good to keep. I found her. Lilian. Jacques' face lit with quiet joy. Ah, enfin. Finally, I always believed you would. Elon sat across from him at the old wooden table, his voice soft but steady as he recounted the story, how their paths had crossed again, how the unspoken truths had unraveled, how time, though cruel, had ultimately brought them back to each other. There were years, Elon confessed, his gaze lowering to the rim of his coffee cup, years where the absence of her was a weight I couldn't set down. I convinced myself to move forward, but the music always pulled me back to her. I think I was waiting, even when I told myself I wasn't. Jacques' hand rested over his, steady and warm. Love, real love, is like the tide. It may recede, it may seem lost, but it always returns to shore. He paused, his voice lowering with gentle wisdom. The heart knows how to find its way home, Elon. And now, so do you. Across the city, Lilian Hartley faced a different kind of reckoning. She had begun physical therapy again, something she had quietly abandoned years before, convinced that the battle was not worth the pain. But now, with Elon beside her, she found the courage to try. Each session was slow, each movement deliberate. Her cane remained close, but she began to test the steadiness of her steps without it, even if only for brief moments. The therapy was not to erase her limitations, it was to reclaim them as part of her story, not as its end. Elon, always intuitive, sensed she was ready to confront the place that had once held only sorrow. One evening, as they listened to soft records playing in her apartment, he turned to her, his voice gentle but firm. I've been thinking, maybe it's time we return to the Eiffel Tower. Together, I'd like to give that place a new meaning for us. Lilian hesitated, her breath catching. Elon, I'm not sure. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Only if you want to. Only if you're ready. Days later, beneath the soft gray skies of early spring, they approached the tower side by side. Lilian's heart pounded with each step. Her body remembered the weight of a day she never arrived. Her soul carried the ache of the years spent believing she no longer belonged there. But Elon's presence, steady and patient, gave her courage. They took the elevator to the top, slowly, quietly, breathing together as the city unfolded beneath them. The air was crisp, the breeze gentle as it brushed through Lilian's honeyed auburn hair. Her cane tapped softly against the metal floor as they stepped out onto the viewing platform. Elon paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle between them. This, he said softly, his voice thick with meaning, is not where we were supposed to end. This is where we begin again. From his coat pocket, he drew a small velvet box and, without preamble, opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a symbol not of starting over, but of continuing forward. Lilian, will you stay? Will you walk this life with me, exactly as you are? Tears welled in her mossy green eyes, her breath trembling as her heart finally allowed itself to believe. Yes, she whispered, her voice steady with conviction. Yes, I will. For the first time, the tower, once a monument to what they had lost, became a symbol of what they had chosen to reclaim. They spent the following weeks revisiting places from their voyage on the celeste horizon. They returned not as two people suspended by hesitation, but as partners, ready to build new memories where the old ones had frayed. The echoes of their former engagements faded quietly. Both had long since untied those bonds, not in bitterness, but in mutual understanding. Their former companions had moved on, and now, so could they, fully, freely. Their friends and family embraced the reunion with open hearts. Jacques, in particular, welcomed Lilian with the warmth of someone who had always believed she belonged at Elon's side. Marianne, Lilian's dearest friend, wept with quiet joy upon hearing the news. And in small, intimate concert halls, Lilian returned to the stage. Her performances were modest, her audiences close, but her voice, rich with experience and softened by time, carried the kind of beauty that lingers. Elon sat in the front row at every performance, his presence a quiet anchor, his eyes never leaving her as she reclaimed her place in the music she had once feared she had lost. The past no longer loomed over them as a shadow. It had become part of the path, a chapter neither of them would erase, but one they now carried with grace and gratitude. Their love found a new rhythm, slower, steadier, but no less fierce. They walked together, not in perfect strides, but in perfect understanding. What they had built was not born of untouched moments, but of fractured ones, carefully gathered and made whole again. And as they stood once more beneath the iron lattice of the Eiffel Tower, their hands entwined, the city glowing softly around them, they understood. The past had led them here, not to haunt them, but to deliver them home. The apartment they chose together was not grand. It was not adorned with expensive furnishings or commanding views. Instead, it was filled with light, soft golden morning light that spilled over the wooden floors, warm afternoon light that wrapped itself around the white linen curtains. It was a place of simplicity, of quiet, of second chances. Elon Musk and Lilian Hartley moved through its rooms like two people learning the rhythm of home for the first time. There, in the tender space they carved for themselves, the old ache dissolved. Elon filled the apartment with the sound of his cello, composing new pieces inspired not by loss, but by the woman now seated beside him, whole, present, gloriously imperfect. His music softened, carrying tones of renewal, melodies that no longer searched for what was missing, but embraced what had finally been found. Lilian, who for so long had guarded her independence with sharp edges, allowed herself to be cared for. She accepted Elon's small gestures, the way he steadied her as they crossed uneven streets, the way he brewed her favorite tea without asking, the way he instinctively positioned chairs, always thinking of her comfort. And yet, in his presence, she never felt small. She never felt fragile. She felt seen. Their days unfolded in slow, deliberate beauty. Mornings were filled with the hum of conversations that stretched lazily over cups of coffee. They spoke of everything and nothing, of poetry, of music, of childhood memories that now made them laugh instead of ache. They walked together through the quiet corners of Paris, never far, never fast, but always in step. Lilian's cane tapped gently beside them, no longer something to hide, but simple companion to their shared pace. Elon made room in the apartment for Lilian's students, creating a sunlit corner where her young singers could gather, where music could continue to grow in their lives. He adjusted the furniture, adding soft cushions and sturdy chairs, preparing the space not just for Lilian, but for the joyful noise that would soon return to it. And so it did. The apartment filled with the sweet, earnest voices of children learning to shape their sound, to find their own courage in music. Lilian's eyes sparkled as she taught them, her quiet encouragement drawing out their best. Elon often paused in his own practice to watch her, this woman who had once believed she was destined for solitude, now surrounded by life. Together, they planned small journeys. Nearby villages, seaside cafes, quiet gardens. There was no urgency, no race to conquer distant horizons. Every trip was a celebration of what they could still reach, what they could still savor. Lilian began reconnecting with old friends, people who had once thought she had disappeared into the folds of life they would never know. They welcomed her return with open arms, as though the years had only paused their friendship, waiting patiently for her to return. Elon's music transformed. Whereas earlier compositions had carried the weight of longing, his new works shimmered with something lighter, something whole. Critics noticed. His pieces now moved with a profound gentleness, his melodies unfolding with the texture of hope, of reconciliation, of steady, resilient love. His concerts drew quiet admiration. Listeners spoke of the way his cello now seemed to speak directly to the heart, weaving stories not of heartbreak, but of lives repaired. In the apartment's modest music room, Lilian carefully planned a special surprise. She gathered her students, working with them for weeks in secret. And on a quiet Sunday, she invited Elon to a small community hall where her students, dressed in simple white and soft pastels, stood nervously on stage. When the children began to sing, the purity of their voices wrapped around the room like silk. The song was one Elon recognized, a gentle, familiar melody he had composed during his darkest years, now reborn with new light. Lilian had written lyrics for it, words about finding home, about healing, about how love remains, even when silence lingers. Elon's chest tightened, his throat burning as he listened. When the final note faded, he rose slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of gratitude, by the quiet beauty of what Lilian had given him. Not just this performance, but the chance to begin again. Afterward, as they walked home beneath the soft dusk sky, he said, "Thank you for giving me the chance to know this life." Lilian smiled, her mossy green eyes shimmering. "It's ours, Elon. We made it together." They often spoke of how strange it was, this gift of beginning again. They did not take it for granted. They celebrated small things, the sound of rain against the window, the comfort of an ordinary morning, the soft clink of teacups, the quiet touch of a hand resting on another's arm. Their love matured, not a blaze, but a steady flame, glowing warmly through daily acts of presence and patience. Each shared glance, each gentle gesture, each evening spent with music became a treasure. They learned, too, to live with Lilian's limitations. There were days her body grew tired, days her steps faltered, but neither of them allowed those moments to diminish the fullness of their lives. Elon adapted, Lilian persisted, and they found joy in the rhythm they had made their own. What they built together was simple. It was not made of grand stages or sweeping adventures. It was made of carefully chosen moments. It was made of honesty, of tending to each other with reverence. In the golden light of their home, among scattered music sheets and teacups left half full, they lived quietly, fully, beautifully. The past no longer shadowed them. It had softened into something else, a path, not a weight. It had brought them here. And here, in the tender present, they finally belonged. The soft sea breeze of Hanfla greeted them with the familiar scent of salt and quiet memory. It had been years since Elon Musk and Lilian Hartley last stood on these wooden docks, their farewell etched in the air like a lingering note never resolved. Now, as they walked side by side, the cobbled streets beneath them seemed to carry not the weight of parting, but the tender pulse of return. Elon glanced at Lilian, watching the way her mossy green eyes softened as they took in the harbor's gentle sway, the pastel boats bobbing calmly against their ropes. She walked more confidently now, her cane tapping lightly at her side, not as a symbol of frailty, but as a quiet companion on this journey they had reclaimed. "This place feels smaller than I remember," Lilian murmured with a faint smile. "Or perhaps we've simply grown larger," Elon replied, his voice warm, his hand finding hers with natural ease. They wandered slowly through the harbor, past familiar shops and sunlit cafes, the streets stitched with echoes of who they once were. The last time they had been here, their love had just begun to find its shape. Now it had settled, steady, weathered, and deeply rooted. Their walk led them to a small boat waiting quietly for them, much like the one they had once shared during their voyage on the Celeste horizon. The gentle rocking beneath their feet as they stepped aboard was both a memory and a promise. As they drifted through the harbor, Elon's gaze remained on Lilian. There was something lighter in her now, a freedom he had only dreamed she might one day embrace. Her smile no longer carried the quiet weight of unspoken guilt. It was open, peaceful, real. "You seem lighter," he said softly. Lilian turned to him, her auburn hair catching threads of sunlight as the wind teased loose strands around her face. "I never imagined I could feel this kind of peace. Not after everything." Elon's fingers brushed over hers. "You gave me patience. You taught me to wait, to trust the time we were given, even when it didn't feel like enough." They sat in silence, listening to the gentle splash of water against the hull, the sound of distant seagulls folding into the moment. "What separated us," Elon said after a while, "was only time. And time, ironically, brought us back." Lilian's smile was soft, contemplative. "It healed us. I didn't believe that was possible." She paused, glancing over the water. "Let's keep exploring, Elon. Slowly, carefully, but let's not stop." His heart swelled at the quiet courage in her voice. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Days later, Elon set in motion a plan that had long lived in the quiet corners of his heart. He arranged a concert in a small, intimate hall, a tribute written entirely for Lilian. The program would bear her name, the music crafted from the stories they had lived, the pauses, the reconciliations, the echoes of time that had drawn them back together. He wanted the world to hear not just her story, but their story. But Lilian, too, had her own dream. Together, they decided to open a small school of music, a place where children could find what had once saved them both: melody, rhythm, expression. It would be a home not only for sound, but for second chances. When the school's modest doors finally opened, the rooms were already filled with life. Instruments found eager hands. Voices began to test their reach. Laughter floated through sunlit windows. Elon's beloved grandfather, Jacques, now older, his steps slower but his spirit intact, traveled from the countryside to see the new chapter unfold. "You've found your harbor, mon garçon," Jacques whispered as he embraced his grandson, his voice thick with quiet pride. "You found home." Friends and family gathered to celebrate. Marianne, Lilian's dearest friend, beamed as she watched her step boldly back into the world she had once left behind. Lilian resumed her small performances, not in grand halls, but in the heart of her community. Her voice, delicate, strong, weathered by love and time, found its way back to the stage, where it belonged. The audience sat close, their eyes bright, their hearts softened by the tenderness of her songs. Elon was always there, his presence steady, his gaze holding her with every note. In the quiet evenings at home, they would sit together, sometimes with music, sometimes with silence, their lives stitched together by countless small, precious moments. Elon often found himself marveling at the simple beauty of their days, the way Lilian hummed absent-mindedly while arranging music sheets, the way she tucked her cane carefully by the door before sitting by the window to read. He realized somewhere along the way that he had stopped searching. He no longer sought distant cities or fleeting answers. He had found what he had been reaching for all along, not a place, but a person, not a destination, but a shared life. Their love was no longer a story paused by sorrow. It had become something enduring, a love that had withstood separation, silence, time. It had come full circle. The harbor where they had once parted now held their laughter. The tower that had once witnessed absence now held their promise. The life that had once seemed impossible was now theirs, steady and alive. In the quiet sanctuary they had built together, where music and memory intertwined, they finally understood. The love that had waited so patiently had not merely survived, it had flourished. The little school on the quiet street in Paris slowly transformed from a modest idea into a living, breathing refuge, a place where music was not merely taught, but where it healed, welcomed, and embraced. Elon Musk and Lilian Hartley poured themselves into every detail, their hands shaping each corner of the building, their hearts guiding the vision. They chose soft colors for the walls, warm wooden benches for waiting parents, and large windows that allowed the sunlight to dance across the practice rooms. But more than aesthetics, they built something rare, an inclusive space where children of every ability could come as they were. No challenge was too great, no difference unwelcome. Lilian led this quietly powerful mission, remembering all the doors she once thought were closed to her. She insisted on ramps, wide doorways, and thoughtful seating arrangements. The music here would belong to everyone. Soon, word of Lilian's teaching spread. Her students didn't just learn to sing or play. They found confidence, patience, and joy in her presence. Young girls, in particular, began to see in her a woman who had not been defined by circumstance, but by resilience. She became more than a teacher. She became an inspiration. Elon, deeply moved by the life they were weaving together, composed small jingles for the school. They were light and playful, echoing the sound of children's laughter and the quiet rhythms of domestic life they now cherished. He would hum them as he helped hang new curtains or as he rearranged chairs in Lilian's classroom, small reminders of the happiness he had found in the life they had built. The community quickly embraced the school, not only as a place of learning, but as a cultural home. Families gathered there long after lessons ended. Neighbors who once passed each other in silence now stayed for coffee, their children playing beneath the soft sounds of distant piano keys. The school became a tapestry of shared stories, a place where music knitted people together. One spring afternoon, Lilian announced a special recital. The children, brimming with excitement, would perform pieces dedicated to their parents and grandparents, a tribute to those who had stood beside them, just as Elon had stood by her. Elon watched from the audience that day, his heart swelling with pride as Lilian gently guided her students on stage, her cane tapping softly beside her. The children's voices rose sweetly, trembling but brave, their melodies wrapping the room in warmth. He glanced toward Jacques, seated near the front, his kind eyes shimmering with tears. The generations between them seemed to dissolve in that moment, past, present, and future woven tightly together. When the final note faded, the applause was not thunderous but tender, deeply felt. Letters soon followed from parents and grandparents who found in Lilian's school a sanctuary they had never known their families needed. "Elon," Jacques said quietly after the recital, his voice thick with emotion, "you've built something lasting. This," he gestured softly around the room, "this will outlive you. This is where you found home." The school's gentle success did not go unnoticed by the city. Invitations to community events arrived, and soon Elon and Lilian became familiar faces, beloved not because of Elon's past fame, but because of the quiet, honest work they now shared. It was Lilian who encouraged Elon to begin teaching small cello classes at the school. At first, he hesitated, unsure whether he had the patience for teaching. But Lilian, always steady, gently nudged him forward. "You have more to give than you realize," she whispered one evening as they sat by the window, watching the Paris lights flicker to life. Elon's classes soon filled with eager young students, drawn not only to his skill, but to the quiet way he believed in them. Together, Elon and Lilian began planning short trips to nearby towns, bringing their students to perform in small squares and humble theaters. They traveled carefully, taking time to savor each journey. For many of their students, it was the first time leaving their neighborhoods. For Elon and Lilian, it was another way of living fully, side by side, in the freedom they had fought so long to find. One night, long after the school's lights had dimmed and their students had gone home, Elon composed a piece he had carried in his heart since their reconciliation, a song for Lilian, for the Eiffel Tower, for the time they lost and the time they reclaimed. It was a quiet, haunting melody, woven with tender rises and lingering pauses. He named it simply "To Lilian at the Tower." When he played it for her in their apartment, Lilian closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat as the music wrapped around her. "This is our story," she whispered. The piece soon became the school's unofficial anthem, played gently in the background of its corridors, woven into its advertisements, etched into the hearts of those who passed through its doors. It was more than a song. It was a memory made permanent, a promise that love, when tended with patience, can endure. Their life settled into a rhythm of purpose. The days no longer felt like something to chase or something to outlast. Each moment was enough. They built a home not from grand gestures, but from steady ones, a shared cup of tea, an evening walk, a hand resting quietly atop another's as music filled their rooms. Their love, once interrupted, had found its place, not in haste or fantasy, but in the small, faithful acts of building something together. Their life now was not just lived, it was inhabited, cherished, and fully embraced. And in this carefully crafted world of song, laughter, and presence, they had written the final refrain of their long journey. Love remains. It lives in what we build. It endures in what we share. It flourishes in what we choose again and again, every single day. It was during a soft spring evening, beneath the glittering lights of a charity gala, that the past, once a distant silhouette, quietly approached Elon Musk. The event was modest, held in a sunlit hall filled with friends from the community and fellow musicians, gathered to raise funds for local schools. Elon moved through the space with the easy grace of a man no longer chased by ghosts. And yet there she was, his former fiancée, her expression warm, her demeanor gracious as she approached him. "Elon," she greeted, her voice carrying no sharp edges, only a polite nostalgia. "I've followed your work, your school. It's wonderful what you and Lilian have built." He offered a genuine smile. "Thank you. And you? Are you happy?" "I am," she said, her gaze kind, her hand resting lightly on the arm of her husband, who joined her a moment later. "We were never meant to be, you and I. But it led us to the right places, didn't it?" Elon nodded, feeling not a trace of regret, only a quiet affirmation that life had arranged itself as it should. Later, as the evening air cooled, Lilian Hartley shared a similar encounter. As she guided a small group of her students toward their performance space, she came across her former fiancé, his familiar face now softened by time, his hand gently holding that of his wife. There was no awkwardness, no bitterness. They exchanged a few words, warm and brief. His life had blossomed in a different garden, and so had hers. There was peace in the parting, and even greater peace in this gentle acknowledgement. The past, it seemed, had finally folded itself neatly behind them. The next afternoon, Elon attended a concert at a small conservatory. A young cellist, barely in his 20s, performed with a passion that stirred something deep in Elon's chest. Afterward, the young man approached him, his hands still trembling from the performance. "I grew up listening to your compositions," he confessed. "You made me fall in love with the cello. You made me believe music could tell the truth." Elon, touched and slightly astonished, thanked him quietly, realizing how his story had silently reached places he never intended. Meanwhile, Lilian had begun to write small articles for a local newspaper, essays about music, resilience, and the quiet power of starting again. Her words, tender and honest, reached readers who had long believed their best days were behind them. Through her writing, she extended her hand to others who had once folded themselves away in silence. One evening, while tidying a drawer in their apartment, Elon stumbled upon something unexpected, a letter, yellowed with time, its edges worn. It was addressed to him, in Lilian's delicate handwriting. His breath caught as he unfolded it. The letter was written in the days following her accident, the words raw, filled with apologies, with sorrow she had never voiced aloud. She had written of her fear, her guilt, her certainty that he deserved a life untouched by the weight she now carried. But she had never sent it. As he read, the ache returned, not the ache of loss, but of realizing how long she had carried this alone. When he gently brought it to her, Lilian's eyes glistened with tears. "I never had the courage to send it," she whispered. "I thought if I kept it, I could protect you from the truth." Elon's voice was soft, steady, but the truth brought us here. Every turn, every silence, it all led us to now. Maybe it was always meant to unfold this way. Her tears slipped quietly down her porcelain cheeks, but there was no heaviness in them. They were the last of an old sorrow, ready to dissolve. In the weeks that followed, they began to revisit their past with new eyes, not to rewrite it, but to honor it. They walked through the same streets where they had first seen each other after the long years apart, their hands now comfortably intertwined, their steps slow but certain. The weight of what had once been unsaid no longer pressed upon them. They spoke openly of their detours, of their hesitations, of the love that had waited patiently beneath it all. One soft evening, Lilian sat at her piano, her fingers lightly grazing the keys as she began to play an old melody, one they had shared on the celeste horizon. It was a song of beginnings, of promises once fragile. Elon joined her, his cello resting against his shoulder, his bow gliding over the strings in perfect harmony. Their music, once fractured by time, now flowed as if it had never been interrupted. The past, they realized, was no longer a burden. It had become something beautiful, something they could now carry not with grief, but with gratitude. The people around them felt the shift. The children in their school noticed the quiet way they laughed together, the way their eyes softened when they met across a crowded room. They had become a living testament to love that perseveres, to wounds that heal, to silence that finds its voice. The chapter of their interrupted story had not been torn out. It had simply waited for its time. And now, as they walked through their familiar Parisian neighborhood, as the music they created filled the spaces around them, they understood. The wounds of the past had become their greatest treasures. The scars had become their map. And the love that had endured had become their home. The little music school on the corner of the sun-warmed street had survived its first year. And more than that, it had flourished. What began as a quiet dream between two people had grown into a home, a refuge where music stitched hearts back together. To mark this milestone, Elon Musk organized a celebration unlike any the school had seen. He wanted it to be more than a party. He wanted it to be a tribute to the children, to the families, to Lilian Hartley, and to the story that had carried them all here. The invitations were written by hand. The decorations were simple, chosen carefully by the students. There were garlands of paper music notes, bouquets of wildflowers gathered from a nearby park, and long tables filled with homemade treats brought by the families who had come to love this place as their own. The school hall, usually filled with the soft hum of practice and the sweet stumble of learning fingers, now rang with laughter and shared stories. Old students returned, their smiles wide as they reunited with familiar faces. Friends from distant cities traveled back, and neighbors who had quietly watched the school blossom now stepped inside with open arms. At the heart of the celebration stood Elon's personal touch, a carefully curated exhibition of portraits. Each image captured a story: children mid-song, young hands gripping violins for the first time, and Lilian, radiant and thoughtful, caught in quiet moments of teaching, of listening, of simply being present. When Lilian saw the portraits, her breath caught in her throat. She turned to Elon, her mossy green eyes shimmering. "You've made me a part of this forever." "You were always the heart of it," he whispered. Midway through the evening, one of the school's board members invited the families to gather. Without warning, Lilian found herself at the center of a spontaneous homage. Parents and children spoke, not with rehearsed speeches, but with trembling voices filled with sincerity. They spoke of the doors Lilian had opened, the quiet patience she offered, and the strength she had unknowingly passed on to every child who entered her classroom. "You taught my daughter to find beauty in her differences," one mother said, her voice thick with gratitude. "You taught her that her place in the world is already hers." Elon's chest swelled with emotion as he stepped forward to offer his own words. "When we started this school," he began, his voice steady but tender, "it wasn't to build walls or to teach perfection. It was to create a place where music could stitch us back together, where patience could be louder than fear, where love, quiet, steady love, could rebuild what life sometimes tries to break." His eyes met Lilian's across the room, and I learned that from her. Lilian wiped away tears that she no longer tried to hide. "I found the greatest gift here," she said softly, her voice breaking just enough to reveal the depth beneath it. "Not just music, not just purpose, but a love that waited. A love that taught me I was never too far gone." After the applause softened, a small girl approached Lilian with a carefully folded piece of paper. "It's for you," the child said shyly. Lilian unfolded the drawing, a delicate, hand-drawn sketch of the Eiffel Tower, standing tall under a smiling sun, surrounded by simple, childlike hearts. She let out a soft, tender laugh, pressing her hand to her chest. It was no longer a symbol of loss. The tower, once the site of her deepest sorrow, had become a monument to new beginnings. As the evening drifted into soft music, Elon offered his hand to Lilian. "May I?" he asked, with that familiar quiet devotion. She took his hand, her cane resting nearby, her steps slow but steady as they moved together onto the small dance floor. Elon adapted his movements to hers, his pace perfectly attuned, as if their bodies had long ago memorized the rhythm of each other's hearts. The dance was not grand or polished, it was tender, deliberate, beautiful in its simplicity. Someone captured the moment in a photograph. Elon and Lilian, smiling softly, their steps slow but full of joy, surrounded by the people they had gathered along their journey. That image would later hang in the school's main hall, a lasting testament to love that survives time, silence, and the weight of life. In the days that followed, Elon and Lilian decided to create a scholarship in Jacques' name, honoring the man whose quiet wisdom had anchored their story from the beginning. The scholarship would offer children, regardless of circumstance, the chance to chase music without barriers. At the toast, surrounded by friends and the hum of gratitude, Jacques, now visibly older but still sharp, raised his glass. To love, he said, his voice warm and proud. The kind that waits, the kind that walks with you, the kind that builds homes where none existed before. Later that week, a letter arrived for Lilian, unsigned, its handwriting unfamiliar. It read simply, "Thank you for teaching me that the truest love waits without resentment, that it does not vanish in absence. You've reminded me that patience is not weakness, it is the greatest form of courage." Lilian folded the letter slowly, holding it to her chest. Beside her, Elon was carefully organizing a small audio effect within the school, a quiet room filled with his most personal compositions, some written in solitude, others shaped by Lilian's presence. It was a space where students and visitors could listen to the songs that told their story, that whispered of waiting, of return, of forgiveness. When the room was complete, Lilian stood inside with him, both of them surrounded by melodies that had once been too painful to play. Now, they played with warmth, with pride. The chapter closed not with grand farewells, but with a quiet sense of fullness. A life woven carefully, a love chosen deliberately. Gratitude lingered in every note, in every shared glance, in the small, precious hours they continued to build together. In this school, in this city, in this music, they had found not only each other, but themselves. And in the hum of ordinary days, in the laughter of children, in the softness of evening walks, they knew. This was always the home they were meant to create. The soft spring air wrapped gently around Elon Musk and Lilian Hartley as they walked toward the towering silhouette that had once marked the edge of their sorrow. Today, the Eiffel Tower no longer stood as a monument to what was lost. It had become a lighthouse, guiding them back to each other. It was the anniversary of their fateful reunion, the day they had finally broken the silence, the day the years folded in on themselves and gave way to healing. Elon had suggested they return, not out of obligation, but as a quiet celebration of everything they had rebuilt. As they stepped into the elevator, Elon's hand settled naturally over Lilian's, their fingers intertwined with the ease of years spent side by side. The ascent was slow, but this time there was no rush. There was no pulse of waiting, no anxious searching. There was only the soft rhythm of shared breaths, the steady hum of a love that had learned to endure. When they reached the top, Paris stretched wide beneath them, a familiar, forgiving sprawl of rooftops, quiet streets, and glistening bridges. The same city, but their hearts had changed. Elon pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. "I wrote something for you," he said, his voice brushing the space between them like a soft melody. Lilian turned to him, her mossy green eyes glimmering as he handed her the sheet. It was a new composition. The title read simply, "Echoes of the Empire." As she carefully unfolded the page, her breath caught. The music, delicate, soaring, and threaded with soft pauses, was written for her, for this place, for this chapter they had reclaimed. The dedication in Elon's careful handwriting read, "For the one who waited, for the one who never truly left." Tears gathered at the edges of her lashes as she pressed the paper gently to her chest. "I'll treasure this. Always." They stood at the railing, the breeze stirring loose strands of Lilian's honeyed auburn hair, the sunlight catching the golden threads woven through it. "This tower," she whispered, "used to feel like the edge of something I couldn't cross. But now it feels like a bridge." Elon's thumb softly traced over the back of her hand. "It's become our beginning." "Let's come back every year," Lilian said, her voice tinged with both hope and playfulness. "Let's make this our tradition. To celebrate, not the day I didn't arrive, but the day we found our way back." Elon's smile widened. "Agreed. Every year. Same time, same place." They looked out over the city, their hearts quietly revisiting the years that had once stretched painfully between them. They had walked through absence, through silence, through the weight of unanswered questions. But now here they were, together, whole, unburdened. With a soft chuckle, Elon glanced sideways at her. "You know," he mused, "if I'd taken just a few more minutes that day, if I'd walked a little slower, maybe I would have found you." Lilian laughed, her eyes sparkling. "No, our time wasn't then. It had to be this way." As they lingered in the moment, a group of tourists nearby noticed the quiet intimacy between them. A woman approached, her camera in hand, her expression warm and curious. "Excuse me, you two. You look like you've shared something extraordinary. May I take your picture?" Elon and Lilian exchanged a glance, then nodded. The photograph captured more than their image. It captured a story written in glances, in weathered hands, in the soft weight of years reconciled. A story of love that had stumbled, fallen, and stood again. As they descended the tower, Elon gently squeezed Lilian's hand. "I've been thinking, what if we create an exhibit at the school? Something called Tower of Love. We could share our story, yes, but also encourage the children to explore the places that hold meaning for them." Lilian's eyes lit with quiet excitement. "Yes, and let's have them create their own tributes, drawing songs, stories about the places they cherish, the places that shape them." The idea filled them both with a warm sense of purpose, a new way to intertwine their journey with the dreams of the children they taught. As they walked home through familiar streets, the afternoon sunlight trailing behind them, they felt the gentle pull of memory and promise woven together. When they arrived at their apartment, they found a small folded note tucked beneath their door. It was from one of Lilian's students, a quiet child who rarely spoke, but who had always listened intently in class. The note read, "Thank you for teaching me that music is patient, that love waits, that it's okay to take small steps if they are steps forward." Lilian pressed the note to her lips, her heart swelling with a tenderness too large for words. As evening settled around them, Elon and Lilian stepped out onto their small balcony, the soft hush of the city rising to meet them. They stood in a long, quiet embrace, their arms wrapped around each other as they watched the streetlights flicker to life, the world slowly folding into night. There was no need to speak, no need to recount the long road they had traveled. Every beat of their shared silence told the story. A story of love that had been interrupted, yes, but also one that had endured, grown, and now stood as tall and certain as the tower that once held their sorrow. In the gentle hush of that moment, they knew. They had not just returned to each other, they had created a home, one they would revisit again and again, forever etched in the skyline of their hearts. The years that followed were not grand. They were steady, tender, and beautifully ordinary. And in that rhythm, Elon Musk and Lilian Hartley found a kind of happiness that few ever touch, a life built slowly, layer by layer, with purpose and quiet devotion. The little music school they had once dreamed of became a pillar in their community. Its humble beginnings matured into something deeply respected, a place where children found not just melodies, but belonging. The walls, now adorned with photos, drawings, and quiet testaments to love, carried the echoes of a story that had long since outgrown the two who began it. Elon and Lilian worked tirelessly, but they worked with joy. Together, they established a permanent scholarship program, ensuring that children from families of limited means could step into the world of music without hesitation, without the fear of exclusion. Their names would forever be attached to the opportunity now woven into the fabric of the school. Elon, who had once retreated into solitude with his cello, found a new voice as a teacher. His lessons were not just about technique, they were about patience, about listening, about loving the music even when the progress was slow. His students learned more than scales and bowing. They learned to persist, to trust the beauty in waiting. Lilian, ever the quiet flame at the heart of the school, expanded her classes to embrace children with physical limitations. She adapted lessons, reimagined techniques, and gently broke down the barriers that had once tried to hold her back. To the next generation, she became a symbol, a woman who had carried her story, not as a burden, but as a torch. The school's beloved exhibition, Tower of Love, became its signature, a place where visitors could walk among drawings, letters, and photographs that chronicled the many ways love could endure, rebuild, and begin again. Children added to the collection each year, their own small stories woven into the growing tapestry. Lilian's writing, once a quiet exercise at home, reached beyond their small circle. Her article, The Love That Waits, touched hearts across the city. In it, she wrote of the kind of love that is willing to pause, to leave space, to grow in silence. "It is the love that stands at the edge of the platform," she wrote, watching the departing train without bitterness, knowing it may return. "It is the love that does not rush, that does not vanish in absence. It simply remains." The piece found its way into local papers, community boards, and soon, the hearts of those who had long needed its quiet reassurance. One afternoon, Elon received an offer that would have once consumed him, a major international tour, a chance to play on the grandest stages. He listened as the details were recited to him, the scale, the prestige, the acclaim. And then, almost without thinking, he smiled softly and declined. "I've already found the stage that matters," he said later to Lilian as they walked home. "It's here with you. It's in that little room filled with voices still learning how to believe in themselves." Their devotion did not go unnoticed. The city honored them, presenting them with an award for their contributions to education and cultural growth. But for Elon and Lilian, the real honor was the life they lived each day, the quiet unfolding of something genuine. A letter arrived soon after, its handwriting as familiar as a childhood memory. From Jacques, now slowing but still spirited, the words were simple and full. "Thank you for carrying the family's legacy forward, with more heart than I ever dreamed possible. The music, the patience, the home you built is more than I could have asked for you." The letter found its place among their most cherished keepsakes. As the year drew to a close, Elon and Lilian organized a gathering for their students. It was not a concert, but a conversation. A day where the children would share not just music, but what they had learned about kindness, perseverance, and love. The stories were simple, but they held weight. A child spoke of finding her voice. Another shared how music gave him courage in lonely moments. Toward the end, a small girl stepped forward and handed Lilian a folded drawing. On the page were two hands meeting at the top of the Eiffel Tower, delicate and childlike, but unmistakable. Lilian's breath caught, her fingers lingering on the paper. She looked at Elon, who understood without words. Their story, interrupted, mended, and now passed on, had quietly made its way into the hearts of others. That evening, back in the comfort of their apartment, Lilian pulled out the letter she had written so many years before, the one she had never sent, the one Elon had eventually found. They sat side by side, reading it once more, their fingers tracing its worn edges. "I used to think this letter was a goodbye," she said softly. Elon's voice was low, filled with certainty. "It was never a goodbye. It was always a promise waiting to be kept." The weight that had once lived in those words had long since lifted. Now they read the letter as one would read an old love song, not with sorrow, but with gratitude for all it had survived. As the city's evening lights twinkled beyond their balcony, they wrapped themselves in a long, quiet embrace, the kind that held all the days they had shared and all the days yet to come. There was no grand conclusion, no final bow. Only the simple, steady truth. Their love remained. Through time, through silence, through every twist of fate, it had always remained.